Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duelist video. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the second stage of the Goha Rush Festival and what decks I think would be best to try and grind with. So this is a question I get asked a lot while I'm streaming, which is what deck should I use to grind out the ladder in the Goha Rush Festival? And this is specifically talking about day 2, where there will be a time limit on the event of days. So the idea is to try and play a deck that is very strong and very fast and easy to play. So the reason why we want something that's very fast is because typically if you can get the most wins in the smallest amount of time, you'll gain the most points and therefore be able to get to a much higher rank much easier. And the reason we want something very easy is because if we're playing something we have to think about a lot, one, that will slow down our play, which means we'll get less wins per hour. On top of the fact that if we're playing that many games, we really don't want to burn out. And the quickest way to burn out is to have to use your brain constantly over a long period of time. But we really want to play something that's very autopilot, something we don't have to really think about, something that's very easy. So one of the best decks to do this is going to be Dragonic Resonance. This deck is generally very free-to-play friendly. The only card that's kind of hard to get your hands on now is going to be the Dragonic Slayer, and that's because this is an ultra rare from the box. The rest of this deck is very free-to-play friendly, as we only need cards that we can get as level up rewards. We only have to go through the box once to get the Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius, and Piercing Dragon Bunker Strike is a ranked reward. So a lot of this deck is quite easy to come by. So this deck is everywhere on the ladder. You've probably played against this deck a ton. You probably actually play this deck yourself because it is by far the most popular deck in the game. The more modern version of the build uses Dragonic Slayer to pop our opponent's back row, since there are a lot of deadly traps in the game, such as Widespread Ruin, and such as a few other traps that can give the deck a little bit pause for thought, such as the Barrier, and of course, Phantom Bind. So being able to pop your opponent's back row can be very strong. On top of that, we're playing the Dragius primarily because this is the best way to get to our opponent's life points if they are just setting a bunch of monsters. We want to be able to summon out Dragius to attack, get the monsters out of the way, and then attack them directly. The skill is obviously very good because it can turn on Dragonic Slayer's effect, as well as boost our 2300 attack effect Earth monsters to 2800, which is extremely relevant because that gets over most threats, but again, will still mean that you lose to something like the Barrier if we're attacking into 2500 attack monsters like Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius, which is why Slayer comes in clutch. This deck is very easy to play. It's pretty much autopilot. You just kind of play cards as you draw into them, and you do have a very powerful removal tool in Dragonic Pressure, which can wipe the board and let you just kind of get in and attack for game, which is very strong. So this is going to be one of the top picks and probably what you'll run into the most when playing in the second stage. So the next deck we want to look at is Ancient Forces. So Ancient Forces is a very good deck because we are able to make our 1 tribute monsters, such as our Burning Blaze and our Clear Ice, gain 1000 attack, which means they can get up to 26 and 2800 respectively, which is really good because again, that is higher than 25, which is always what we're trying to hit. On top of the fact we do get to use Ancient Arise Dragon, which is a 3000 attacker, as well as the fact its effect can pop our opponent's monsters, and most crucially, it can get rid of Dragius. So this deck is another really strong deck. Again, it's very simple to play. You just kind of summon everything and attack, use your skill to boost more stuff up, remove any threats, and get in as hard as you can. As you can see, this deck is playing all of the engines to try and facilitate tribute summoning. We're using the Seahorse Carrier as well as the Light Aqua engine. We are playing the Curry Bot as well, just to try and have additional ways to be able to fill our hand to be able to get out our tribute monsters as much as possible. We're also on the Ghost Cyclones, and the main reason we're on 2 Ghost Cyclone here is because this deck doesn't have great ways to use back row, and that's because cards like the Barrier are really good when you have very high attack during your opponent's turn. Now that's great for Dragius and Ancient Arise, but our level 6 monsters are only 16 and 18 during our opponent's turn, which means if we weaken our opponent's monsters with the Barrier, we will only be able to crash with 2200 attack at best, which is really not great, which is why the Barrier doesn't fit well in this deck. Music Princess's Recital, on the other hand, is pretty good in this deck, as well as the fact that just because we have extra space because we're not playing more battle traps, we can get away with using something like Ghost Cyclone, which ideally will hit our opponent's Widespread Ruin and prevent us from getting blown out of the game. So this is a very strong build, and this is only one of the 2 Ancient Forces decks. This, I would say, is the more consistent of the 2 because it does run less high level monsters in terms of less 2 tribute monsters. But then we have our other Ancient Forces deck. This is 7-Axis Forces, and this basically cuts down the number of 6s and increases the number of 7s. This version of the deck is a little bit more powerful in terms of being able to consistently make strong end boards, but it is a little bit less consistent because we are playing the extra Ancient Arise Dragon, which can brick us a little bit. You can also swap out one copy of Phoenix Dragon for another copy of Multi-Strike Dragius, but again, that means even more high-level monsters, and our goal is to try and run as few high-level monsters as possible to try and make the deck as smooth as possible. But again, if you do run a lower quantity of high-level monsters, that does mean you won't necessarily see them as often, which is kind of the same as bricking, because not being able to do anything but set 3 is also quite bad. But again, we're using the Seahorse Carriers, we're using the entire Aqua package, we're using the Curry Bot, and for our spell and traps this time, because we do have the extra copy of Ancient Arise Dragon, we have included the Barrier, because the Barrier is really good when combined with Ancient Arise or Multi-Strike Dragon Dragius. We have also included Monster Reincarnation here, and again, this can kind of get flipped around, but because we have access to more copies of Ancient Arise, we'd like to keep reusing them, as well as Monster Reincarnation is perfect to be compared with Seahorse Carrier, because you can use Monster Reincarnation, discard, get back Seahorse, summon Seahorse, bring back another card, and then bam, 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 you've got extra tribute fodder. So just really, really powerful in general, and this is another really strong, very easy to play deck that would be fantastic to play during the second stage. So the next deck we're going to look at is Red Eyes Rebels. Now, I would say this is going to be sort of a tier 2 ladder grinding deck. It's still very good, it's still very strong, and it's still very simple to play. It's a little bit more restrictive in the fact that we do have to try and tribute high level monsters to get off our heavy metal and our Royal Rebels Growls effects. But other than that, this is still very, very simple. We just basically want to use our Red Eyes engine to weaken our opponent's monsters, keep recurring it. We want to try and get off our Royal Rebels heavy metal effect as much as possible. This deck is very good at outing big boards, and that's kind of its main strength. And again, like the last, we're also using the Seahorse Carrier engine because it's just so good. Again, you can cut back some of the back row if you want to in this deck. That is perfectly fine. We could maybe cut out the barriers and just include a few more normal summonables, maybe a couple of Thunder the Thunders, and that will work just as fine. This deck is decent at doing what it does, which is weakening our opponent's monsters using our skill and using Growl, and getting rid of our opponent's problematic monsters using our heavy metal. So now we're going to look at some decks that are definitely still strong, but decks I would not recommend playing. And the first one on that list is going to be Aqua Aggro. So this deck is very strong. This deck has won several tournaments. It's placing really well in tournaments, but I would not call this a good ladder deck. And by that, what I mean is, this deck requires a little bit more thought. This deck can be quite slow. Because of the way the deck plays, it's not quite as unga-bunga as a lot of the other builds, and there is a little bit of finesse in how you play. Because we are on the Prima Gitanas, if we find them early, we have to be careful with how we play them. We can't just be shotgunning life points constantly. And using D and Keto, the Boogie Master, and our skill, we can actually bolster our own life points, which means we are quite good at playing the long game and trying to outlive other decks. Because of that, this deck ends up falling a little bit short if you're trying to play it over long periods. Again, we want fast wins. We want quick, easy games. And this deck, although is very strong and will win a lot of games, is not going to be quick and easy games. The other thing to note in here is that we are playing King's Majesty and the level 1 Fiend package, because again, King's Majesty is just like the next best trap after Widespread Ruin. Just a blanket negate is always going to be really, really strong. So again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this deck for the second stage. Another deck that's pretty good, but is not necessarily great for the second stage, would be anything Warrior. So here, for example, we're looking at 40 card Red Eyes Warrior, but this could be any Warrior deck. Basically, the Warrior deck is very good at stalling things out. It's very good at playing a long control game. And again, that's really not what we are looking for in terms of the second stage. We again want very, very fast, very, very easy. This deck is neither. Playing this deck, you have to think a lot more, as well as a lot of the time, this deck's win condition is stalling out your opponent, which means much longer games, which is, again, really not what we want. Obviously, there are a ton of other decks I haven't really talked about, such as Dragon Casters, which would be probably fine, but I think realistically, both the Dragon decks have probably power crept that a little bit, as well as other decks that exist in the format, such as Seven's Axel Road Spellcasters or Psychics. But realistically, I think a lot of those other decks are underperforming a little bit and thus would not be best to use. I think realistically, if you're looking for the best choice to grind the ladder with and try and get as high as possible, I think your choices are realistically going to be either of the Ancient Forces deck or Dragonic Resonance. I think the Red Eyes Rebels are also fine. Regular Rebels can also be good, but I think it's a little bit less consistent than Red Eyes Rebels personally. And then everything else I would personally just avoid. Again, if you have a deck that works for you and you think would be fun to play, by all means go for it. This is just a simple recommendation of what I would be playing if I was trying to reach those higher ranks. If I'm trying to place very, very highly during the event, I would definitely be on Dragonic Resonance or Ancient Forces, which I think are just two of the best decks at the moment. Again, Aqua Aggro is also absolutely fantastic. I just do not think it would be very good in this specific setting because of the rule set that we have of trying to get as many points as possible in 3 days. But yeah, that's all for the video. I hope this helped you out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.